My name is Ethan. I am 32 years old. For 30 years, my family made it crystal clear who the golden child was, and last Christmas, when I refused to hand over $15 million of my own hard-earned money, my brother collapsed sobbing on the floor while my mother screamed that I stole his future. While I was sitting there, quietly trying to digest my holiday dinner and my family's sheer entitlement, my parents told me I owed my brother my entire life's work. They shamed me in front of a dozen extended relatives right there in our own dining room. But there is one thing they didn't know. I had already secured the best lawyer in the state, and I had a paper trail that was about to expose the darkest, most pathetic secret they had been hiding for years. And now they are the ones begging for mercy. Before I tell you exactly what happened, hit that like button if you believe in absolute justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare really started. The smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine needles filled my parents' house. It was a picture-perfect American Christmas. You know the kind I am talking about. The front yard was covered in lights that my dad had spent 3 days putting up to impress the neighborhood HOA. The dining table was set with Mom's fine china, the stuff she only brought out when she wanted to prove to her sisters that she was living the dream. Everyone was there. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, and sitting right at the head of the table next to my father was Lucas. Lucas is my older brother. He is 35, tall, with that easy smile of a guy who has never had to actually sweat for a single thing in his life. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that Mom had undoubtedly bought for him, and on his wrist was a watch that cost more than my first car. His wife, Sarah, sat quietly next to him, sipping her wine and nodding along to whatever story Lucas was spinning about his supposedly demanding job. I was seated near the end of the table, near the kitchen door. The overflow seating, the afterthought, that was my designated spot in the family hierarchy. For the first hour of dinner, I just kept my head down. I passed the mashed potatoes, I smiled when spoken to, and I listened to Lucas complain about how unfair his corporate salary was, considering his immense talents. It was the same script we played out every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every 4th of July. Then Aunt Clara leaned across the table. Clara has always been the wild card of the family. She doesn't care about my mother's carefully constructed image. She looked right at me, ignoring Lucas entirely, and smiled. "So, Ethan," Clara said, her voice cutting through the chatter, "I heard a little rumor from a friend in the tech sector. How is the software business going? Last I checked, you closed a massive deal." The clinking of silverware stopped. The entire table went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood floor. Mom blinked. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. She looked at me like I had just spoken in tongues. Lucas tilted his head, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "What deal?" Lucas scoffed. "Ethan just tinkers with computers." I set my water glass down. I looked at Clara, then at my parents, and finally at my brother. My heart was thumping a heavy, steady rhythm against my ribs, but my voice came out completely calm. "I sold my company last year," I said simply. My dad frowned, his bushy eyebrows pulling together. "Company? What company, Ethan?" "The real estate logistics software I have been building from the ground up for the last 10 years, I explained, looking right into my father's eyes. "The acquisition went through 10 months ago. It sold for $25 million. The air was instantly sucked out of the room. Aunt Clara beamed, her eyes sparkling with genuine pride. But she was the only one. Mom's face contorted into a mask of pure horror, as if I had just confessed to a brutal crime. Lucas went pale. The smirk vanished, replaced by a deep, flushed red that crept up his neck. His fork clattered loudly against his porcelain plate. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. 25. "What?" he stammered. "Million," I repeated, letting the word hang in the silent dining room. It was a detonation. My parents stared at me, then whipped their heads to look at Lucas, then back at me. And that is when the absolute unthinkable happened. Lucas started shaking his head. He let out a strange, breathless laugh, and then his voice cracked. "That's not fair," he whispered. And then louder, his voice pitching up into a frantic whine. "That is not fair. You can't have that kind of money." He pushed his heavy dining chair back so violently it nearly tipped over. He stood up, his hands trembling, and before anyone could process what was happening, my 35-year-old brother collapsed onto the floor. He didn't just fall. He dropped to his knees, buried his face in his hands, and started sobbing. Deep, chest-heaving sobs, like a toddler who had just been told his favorite toy was thrown in the trash. Sarah rushed to his side, her hands fluttering over his shoulders, looking completely mortified. But Lucas ignored her. He looked up at me from the floor, tears streaming down his face, and pointed a trembling finger. "It is not fair. I have done everything right. I am the one who is supposed to be successful. He gets 25 million. Lucas gasped for air, his face twisted in ugly entitlement. "You need to give me at least 15 million. I deserve it. You owe me." I sat frozen. I literally thought I was hallucinating. But before I could even form a syllable to respond, my mother slammed both of her hands flat onto the dining table. The crystal wine glasses rattled. She stood up, leaning over the table, her eyes practically bulging out of her skull. "You stole his future," she screamed at me, her voice echoing off the walls. "You robbed your brother of what should have been his. How dare you keep this money a secret from this family?" I didn't say a word. I just sat there, looking at the madness unfolding around me. The resentment I had buried for 3 decades finally broke through the surface. This was the moment I realized that my family was not just biased. They were broken. And I knew right then, looking at my brother crying on the floor for my money, that the war had just begun. To understand the sheer insanity of that Christmas dinner, you have to understand the shadow I grew up in. In my family, Lucas was the sun, and I was just the cold, dead rock orbiting somewhere in the dark. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It wasn't something you had to read between the lines to see. It was broadcasted loudly, every single day. When Lucas sneezed, my mother would rush him to the pediatrician, convinced he had a rare ailment that needed immediate attention. When I was 9 years old, I fell out of an oak tree in the backyard and broke my left arm. The bone was literally tenting my skin. I walked into the kitchen crying, clutching my wrist. My mother looked up from her magazine, sighed heavily, and gave me a 10-minute lecture about how reckless I was and how unexpected medical bills were going to ruin their budget. We drove to the emergency room in total silence, and she complained about the copay for a month. That was the rhythm of our household. When Lucas graduated high school with average grades, my parents threw a massive catered party in the backyard. When he went to a private out-of-state college, my parents not only drained their savings to cover his tuition, but they also paid his rent for a luxury downtown apartment. They sent him a monthly allowance for groceries that somehow always transformed into concert tickets, spring break trips, and designer sneakers. Meanwhile, I attended the local community college. There was no college fund left for me. The inheritance from my grandfather? Liquidated to help Lucas buy his first condo. I worked night shifts at a greasy 24-hour diner just to afford my textbooks and keep a roof over my head. I lived in a cramped studio apartment that smelled like mildew and desperation. I ate ramen noodles and generic brand peanut butter for years. Whenever I asked for a little help, even just a loan for a couple of $100s to fix the alternator on my beat-up Honda, my dad would sit me down and give me a stern speech. "Ethan, you need to learn responsibility. The world doesn't hand you things on a silver platter. You have to build character." I learned character, all right. I learned it the hard way. Every scraped-together dollar, every night shift I worked while running on 3 hours of sleep, every time I skipped a meal just to afford internet access for my classes. It all hardened me into steel. But Lucas floated through life on a cloud of unearned privilege. In his late 20s, he got involved in some shady pyramid scheme trying to sell useless supplements. He racked up $40,000 in credit card debt. I remember the day the collection agencies started calling the house. Did my parents give him a speech about responsibility? No. They swooped in like superheroes, took out a second mortgage on their home, and cleared his debts completely. They protected his credit score while mine was in the gutter because of a single late medical bill. The message was etched into my brain. Lucas's mistakes were forgivable tragedies. My struggles were proof that I was a disappointment. By the time Lucas turned 30, my parents helped him put a massive down payment on a suburban house. When I turned 30, I received a store-bought birthday card in the mail. Inside was a crisp $20 bill and a sticky note from my mother that read, "Don't spend it all in one place." I remember sitting on the edge of my mattress, holding that $20 bill, and laughing until my ribs ached. I had stopped expecting fairness a long time ago. Instead, I channeled every ounce of that rejection, every bit of that simmering resentment into my work. I kept my head down. I taught myself coding at night after my shifts at the diner. I studied supply chain issues. I noticed a massive gap in how commercial real estate firms handled their logistics, and I started building a software solution in my tiny apartment. It was grueling. There were nights I slept on the floor of my office because I couldn't afford to keep the heat on in my apartment. I pitched my software to 50 different firms and got 50 rejections. But I didn't stop, couldn't stop, because failure meant proving my parents right. Finally, a mid-sized firm took a chance on my platform. It worked perfectly. Word of mouth spread. Suddenly, I had 3 clients, then 10, then 50. I hired a small team. We scaled quietly. I poured every cent of profit back into the business. I drove the same old Honda. I wore the same cheap clothes. My family had absolutely no idea what I was doing, because they never once asked. Whenever I saw them, they only wanted to talk about Lucas's new promotion, which usually meant he had just survived another round of layoffs at whatever middle management job he was clinging to. Fast forward a decade. After years of brutal setbacks and relentless grinding, a massive tech conglomerate approached me. They wanted to buy my software outright and integrate it into their global systems. The negotiations took 6 months. When the final paperwork was drawn up, I sat in a sleek boardroom in downtown Chicago. I gripped the heavy pen they handed me. I signed my name. The deal closed for $25 million. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't pop champagne. I drove back to my modest apartment, sat on the couch in the dark, and stared at the digital balance on my banking app. 7 zeros. It didn't feel real. But more than the money, what I felt was a profound, overwhelming sense of vindication. I had won. I had beaten the odds, and I had done it completely alone. I made a conscious decision not to tell my family. I wanted to see how long it would take for them to notice my success on their own. I wanted to see if they would ever look at me and see a successful man, rather than the family failure. They never did, until that Christmas dinner. After my mother screamed that I had stolen Lucas's future, the room descended into utter chaos. Aunt Clara tried to intervene, telling my mother she was being ridiculous. That only made it worse. Sarah was trying to pull Lucas up from the floor, but he shrugged her off, glaring at me with red, puffy eyes. "You did this just to humiliate me," Lucas hissed, his voice thick with tears. "You have always been jealous of me. You just wanted to show off." I stood up slowly. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. I looked at my father, who was staring down at his plate, refusing to make eye contact with me. His silence was the loudest noise in the room. He was complicit. He always had been. "I didn't steal anything from anyone," I said, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of their hysteria. "I built a company while you were paying his rent. I earned my money, and for the first time in my life, I am going to be entirely selfish." I walked out the front door, leaving my untouched turkey on the table. The freezing December air hit my face, and I took a deep breath. I thought the worst was over. I thought walking out that door was the end of it. I was so incredibly wrong. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling shadows, replaying my mother's screaming face and Lucas's pathetic breakdown on the floor. I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and absolute clarity. The fantasy of a supportive family was officially dead and buried. I thought giving them the silent treatment would let things cool down. But a mother's entitlement knows no bounds. 2 days after Christmas, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Mom. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but my gut told me I needed to know what her angle was. I swiped answer. "Have you thought about what we said?" she demanded. "No, hello. No, how are you doing?" Just straight to the demands. I gripped the edge of the granite counter. "About what?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. "Don't play dumb with me, Ethan," she snapped, her voice carrying that sharp, authoritative edge she used when I was a teenager. "Your brother is having a mental breakdown. He hasn't slept in 2 days. Sarah says he is depressed. We have always taught you that family comes first. This is your chance to step up and prove you belong in this family. Transfer the 15 million to Lucas. You will still have 10 million left. That is more than enough for a single guy like you." I actually let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Let me get this straight. You want me to hand over the majority of the fortune I spent 10 years bleeding for, just because Lucas threw a temper tantrum on the dining room floor? He inspired you," she shrieked through the speaker. "If it wasn't for Lucas pushing you to be better, you never would have worked so hard. You owe him a share of your success. And frankly, Ethan, you owe us for raising you. If you don't do the right thing, there will be consequences." She hung up before I could reply. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, my blood running cold. Consequences. It sounded like a desperate threat from a delusional woman. I brushed it off and went back to my laptop to check my emails. An hour later, an automated alert popped up on my phone from my primary wealth management bank. "Suspicious login attempt blocked." My stomach dropped into my shoes. I immediately logged into my secure portal. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Someone had tried to log into my accounts. Not just once, but 4 times. They had tried to initiate a wire transfer. A massive one. The security algorithms had flagged it because the destination account was unregistered. I looked at the routing numbers the hacker had tried to send the money to. I recognized the last 4 digits. It was Lucas's personal checking account. I called the bank's fraud department immediately. They confirmed that the login attempts used my old security questions, things only a family member would know, like the name of my first pet and the street I grew up on. My own flesh and blood had just tried to rob me blind. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, got into my car, and drove straight to my parents' house in the suburbs. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The betrayal tasted like battery acid in the back of my throat. I pulled into their pristine driveway and slammed it into park. But before I even got out of the car, I froze. Sitting right there in the driveway, gleaming under the winter sun, was a brand new, slate gray Porsche 911. It had temporary dealer plates on it and a massive red velvet bow stuck to the windshield. I got out of my car, staring at the luxury vehicle. The front door of the house swung open. Lucas walked out, jingling a set of keys in his hand, a smug, arrogant grin plastered across his face. My mother walked out right behind him, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "Nice ride, huh?" Lucas called out, leaning against the hood of the Porsche. "Figured I deserved a little pick-me-up after the stress you put me through this week." I walked slowly up the driveway, my eyes darting from the car to my brother, then to my mother. "How exactly did you pay for this, Lucas?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Because I know for a fact you are drowning in debt." Lucas shrugged, tossing the keys in the air and catching them. "Family takes care of family, Ethan. Mom and Dad knew you would eventually come to your senses and do the right thing. So they helped me get a head start on my inheritance." I turned my glare to my mother. "You tried to hack into my bank account this morning," I stated. It wasn't a question. Evelyn didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She lifted her chin, staring me down with cold defiance. "We were just trying to expedite what is fair. You are being stubborn and greedy. We were going to allocate the funds properly since you refused to act like a brother." "That is a federal crime, Mom," I said, feeling a tremor of absolute rage vibrating through my chest. "That is wire fraud. You tried to steal from me." "It isn't stealing if it belongs to the family," she yelled back. Consider this car an advance on what you owe us. You will pay us back for it. It's the least you can do." I looked at the Porsche again. Something wasn't clicking. My parents were comfortable, sure, but they didn't have a spare 150 grand lying around in cash to buy a luxury sports car outright, especially not after bailing Lucas out of his pyramid scheme. "How did you finance this?" I demanded, taking a step toward the car. I peered through the window at the dealership paperwork sitting on the passenger seat. Lucas sneered. "Don't worry about it. My credit is fine." But I saw the logo on the paperwork. It was a high-end dealership downtown. And I saw something else. I saw the edge of a signature line. I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed the dealership. I walked away from them, down the sidewalk, ignoring my mother screaming at me to get off the phone. When the finance manager answered, I gave him my name. I told him I suspected identity theft regarding a recent purchase of a Porsche 911 delivered to my parents' address. The finance manager hesitated, then pulled up the file. "Sir, your name is listed as the primary guarantor on the short-term bridge loan used to secure the vehicle. We received the digital DocuSign from your verified family email address this morning." The ground tilted beneath my feet. The air rushed out of my lungs. They didn't just try to hack my bank account. When that failed, my mother had used an old shared family computer, accessed my secondary email account that I rarely used, and forged my digital signature to guarantee a massive luxury car loan for my brother. I ended the call and walked slowly back up the driveway. Lucas was stroking the side mirror of the Porsche, completely oblivious to the legal hellfire that was about to rain down on him. My mother glared at me. "Are you done throwing your little tantrum?" she asked nastily. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. I looked at the brother who had been handed the world on a silver platter and still wanted to take my plate. The lingering hope that maybe, deep down, they actually loved me, died right there on the concrete driveway. "You forged my signature on a loan document," I said softly. Lucas's hand stopped moving. My mother's eyes flickered with a split second of panic before masking it with anger. "We did what we had to do," she shouted. "You forced our hand." I nodded slowly. The anger vanished, replaced by a terrifying, absolute zero coldness. "Enjoy the car, Lucas," I said, turning my back on them and walking toward my Honda. "Because it's the last thing you will ever get." I drove away, leaving them standing in the driveway. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I would just roll over and pay the bills like I always did. They thought I was still the weak little boy desperate for their approval. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I had $25 million, a terrifying amount of patience, and I was about to go to war. The moment I got back to my apartment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow. I sat at my kitchen island, opened my laptop, and went to work. If my family wanted to play dirty, I was going to show them what a scorched earth campaign actually looked like. The first call I made was to Olivia. Olivia was the corporate attorney who had handled the acquisition of my software company. She was a shark in a tailored suit, a woman who drank espresso black and looked at human emotion as an exploitable weakness. I paid her a massive retainer for a reason. I sat in her glass-walled office the next morning, overlooking the city skyline. I slid my laptop across the mahogany desk and showed her the bank alerts, the emails, and the documentation I had managed to pull regarding the forged Porsche loan. Olivia reviewed the files in total silence. Her face was entirely unreadable. After 5 minutes, she closed the laptop and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Your mother committed felony wire fraud and identity theft," Olivia stated, her voice as smooth and cold as ice. "And your brother is complicit in receiving stolen goods and fraudulent financing. Do you want them in prison, Ethan? Because I can make that happen by Friday." I rubbed my temples. Sending my parents and brother to federal prison felt like a step too far, even now. It would destroy my father, who had always just cowardly stood by, and it would tear the extended family apart. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want them behind bars. I want them humiliated. I want them legally bound from ever touching me again. And I want them to pay for that car themselves, or watch it get repossessed." Olivia nodded, a faint, dangerous smile touching the corners of her mouth. Understood. We do this surgically. We brought in Ben, a forensic accountant. Within 48 hours, Ben had moved the vast majority of my liquid assets into blind trusts and offshore holding accounts. I changed every password, implemented biometric security on everything, and completely wiped my digital footprint from any device my family had ever had access to. To build an airtight case for mediation, I needed undeniable proof. Olivia hired a private investigator. Within 3 days, the PI had secured the IP logs from my bank, proving the login attempts originated from the Wi-Fi router inside my parents' living room. He also obtained the metadata from the forged DocuSign, tying it directly to my mother's personal iPad. While I was building this fortress, my family was busy launching a smear campaign. My phone started blowing up with texts from aunts, uncles, and cousins. Evelyn had called everyone. She told them I had lost my mind, that the money had turned me into a greedy, heartless monster, and that I was refusing to help my poor, struggling brother pay for basic necessities. The hypocrisy was nauseating. I felt incredibly isolated. The only person in the family I thought I could trust was my cousin, Greg. Greg had always been the cool older cousin, the one who bought me a beer when I was 19 and told me to ignore my parents' obvious favoritism. I met Greg at a quiet coffee shop downtown to vent. "Man, Aunt Evelyn is losing it," Greg said, stirring his latte, looking at me with sympathetic eyes. "She is telling everyone you are trying to bankrupt Lucas. You know how she gets. But hey, you gotta admit, 15 million is a lot of money to keep from your own brother." I frowned, the coffee suddenly tasting bitter. "He doesn't deserve a dime, Greg. They forged my signature on a loan for a Porsche." Greg's eyes widened. "Whoa, seriously? Do you have proof of that?" "I have everything," I said, leaning in. "IP addresses, metadata, the whole 9 yards. My lawyer is preparing a massive civil lawsuit. We are going to bury them in mediation next week." "Wow," Greg said, shaking his head. "That is intense. So what is the lawyer's exact strategy?" Something in Greg's tone felt off. It was too eager, too probing. I glanced down at the table. Greg's phone was sitting face down near his coffee cup. But I noticed the edge of the screen was glowing slightly, reflecting off the polished wood. I casually reached out and flipped his phone over. There, running on the screen, was a voice recording app. The timer was currently at 14 minutes and 30 seconds. Greg went pale. He lunged for the phone, but I snatched it away, my blood running hot. I looked at the screen, then looked up at my cousin, the one guy I thought had my back. "You are recording me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Greg swallowed hard, looking around the coffee shop nervously. "Ethan, listen. Aunt Evelyn. She promised to help me out with my mortgage if I just found out what your legal plan was. She is terrified, man. She just wants to know what she is up against. A mole." My mother had actually bribed my cousin to act as a spy. The paranoia and manipulation ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I hit stop on the recording, deleted the file, and dropped the phone into Greg's half-full latte. "Tell Evelyn I said hello," I said, standing up from the table. "And tell her that if she thinks she is terrified now, she hasn't seen anything yet." I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Greg staring at his ruined phone. I realized then that I was entirely on my own, but that was fine. I had been on my own my entire life. I called Olivia as I walked to my car. "File the papers," I told her, my voice cold and steady. "Mediation next week. I want to look them in the eye when we drop the hammer." I was ready for war, but even I didn't know the massive, devastating secret that Olivia was about to uncover. A secret that would shatter my family's golden illusion forever. The mediation was officially scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late January, right in the dead center of the bitterest winter we had seen in a decade. I remember waking up that morning and looking out the window of my apartment. The sky over the city was the color of a bruised piece of iron, heavy and dark, threatening to drop a massive snowstorm but so far only delivering a relentless, biting wind that rattled the glass panes. I stood there for a long time, holding a mug of black coffee, feeling the heat seep into my palms. I did not feel angry anymore. The white-hot rage that had consumed me in the driveway of my parents' house had entirely burned itself out. What was left in its place was something much colder, much harder, and infinitely more dangerous. I was walking into a war room today, and I was holding the nuclear codes. I met Olivia, my corporate attorney, in the lobby of the downtown high-rise where the mediation center was located. Olivia was an absolute shark. She was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled back into a severe, uncompromising bun. She carried a thick, vintage leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to be classified as a blunt force weapon. I, on the other hand, deliberately chose not to wear a suit. I wore a simple pair of dark jeans, a crisp white button-down shirt, and a navy blazer. I did not want to sit across the table looking like the $25 million tech mogul they accused me of being. I wanted to look exactly like the man they had spent 32 years ignoring. I wanted them to look at my face and remember the kid who worked the graveyard shift at a greasy diner, the kid who ate generic peanut butter from the jar because he could not afford a loaf of bread, the kid whose medical bills were considered a frustrating inconvenience. We rode the elevator up to the 42nd floor in total silence. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a sterile, freezing reception area with floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a sweeping, dizzying view of the sprawling urban real estate below. We were ushered into Conference Room B. A massive, polished mahogany table dominated the center of the room. The mediator, a retired district court judge named Harrison, was already sitting at the head of the table, meticulously reviewing the preliminary filings through a pair of half-moon reading glasses. At exactly 9 in the morning, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. The temperature in the room seemed to immediately plummet 10 degrees. My mother walked in first. She was wearing a designer camel hair trench coat and a vibrant silk scarf draped elegantly around her neck. She had her chin tilted up, radiating that familiar, suffocating aura of absolute self-righteousness. She looked like a woman arriving at a charity gala rather than a legal mediation for felony fraud. My father trailed closely behind her, moving like a man walking to his own execution. His shoulders were slumped, his face was pale and drawn, and his eyes were firmly glued to the expensive patterned carpet. And then came Lucas. My brother strutted into the room like he owned the entire building. He was wearing a custom-fitted midnight blue suit with a silk tie. His hair was perfectly styled, and on his wrist flashed a heavy, silver watch. His jaw was set in a smug, defiant line. He looked exactly like the golden child who believed the rules of the universe simply did not apply to him. They were accompanied by their legal counsel, a slick, overconfident man named Davis, who carried himself with the unearned swagger of a guy who thought this case was going to be a walk in the park. Nobody said a word of greeting. Nobody offered a handshake. I sat across from them, folding my hands calmly on the cold, polished wood of the table. I looked directly at my brother. Lucas absolutely refused to meet my gaze. He was too busy adjusting his expensive watch, straightening his cuffs, and whispering confidently into his lawyer's ear. My mother, however, stared absolute daggers at me. Her eyes were burning with a toxic, irrational mix of hatred and entitlement. She truly, deeply believed that she was the victim in this scenario. She had convinced herself that this entire legal proceeding was just another prime example of me being a difficult, ungrateful, and fundamentally broken child. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, tapping his pen against a legal pad to formally open the session. He gave a brief, practice speech about the ultimate goals of mediation, heavily emphasizing the mutual desire to keep ugly family disputes out of the public courtroom. He used soft, pacifying words like reconciliation, healing, family unity, and mutual understanding. I glanced sideways at Olivia. I could see a tiny muscle twitching in her jaw as she barely suppressed a scoff. Davis, their slick lawyer, confidently took the floor first. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and adopted a tone of deep, patronizing concern that made my skin crawl. Judge Harrison, we are gathered here today to quickly and amicably resolve a deeply unfortunate family misunderstanding. Davis began, his voice dripping with fake, manufactured empathy. My clients are entirely heartbroken by this situation. They raised Ethan from birth. They provided a warm home for him. They fed him, clothed him, and guided him. Recently, Ethan experienced a truly massive, unexpected financial windfall. Now, as is extremely common in tight-knit, loving families, there were subsequent discussions about inheritance, about sharing the wealth to elevate the entire family unit. Ethan's brother Lucas has dedicated his entire adult life to a rigorous, high-stress corporate career. There were long-standing verbal agreements regarding mutual financial support between the brothers. The recent actions my clients took, which opposing counsel has aggressively and unfairly framed as a lawsuit-worthy offense, were simply a clumsy, misguided attempt to enforce those existing verbal agreements. We are fully willing to drop all of our counterclaims for severe emotional distress if Ethan simply agrees to a reasonable private settlement of $5 million today. It is a mere fraction of his vast wealth, and it restores the family honor. I sat perfectly still, my breathing slow and measured. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was breathtaking. They were actually sitting in a legal setting, attempting to spin their felony wire fraud and identity theft as a clumsy attempt to enforce a completely fictional verbal agreement. $5 million. They wanted me to write them a check for $5 million as a reward for them trying to illegally hack into my bank accounts and steal $15 million. It was the absolute pinnacle of narcissistic delusion. Olivia did not shout. She did not express outrage. She did not even raise her voice. She simply unlatched her heavy leather briefcase with a sharp, echoing, satisfying click. "Mr. Davis," Olivia said, her voice completely devoid of any warmth or human emotion. "Your framing of these events is entirely fictional, and frankly, insulting to the intelligence of everyone in this room. We are not here to discuss a family misunderstanding. We are not here to negotiate a gift. We are here to explicitly discuss a systematic, highly documented effort to defraud my client. There were never any verbal agreements. There is no shared family inheritance. There is only calculated theft." Olivia smoothly slid a perfectly bound, thick folder across the mahogany table toward Judge Harrison, and then pushed a duplicate copy toward the opposing counsel. "Exhibit A," Olivia stated, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "Certified bank security logs and digital forensic analysis. On December 27th, exactly 2 days after a family holiday dinner, for separate, highly coordinated unauthorized login attempts were made on my client's primary wealth management accounts. The IP address for every single one of these attempts was traced directly and irrefutably to the residential Wi-Fi router registered in Arthur and Evelyn's name. Furthermore, the destination routing number for the attempted unauthorized wire transfer of $15 million belongs to a personal checking account owned solely by Lucas. My mother scoffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "We knew his security questions because we are his parents. We raised him. We knew the name of his first dog and the street we lived on. We were just trying to secure the funds before he wasted them on frivolous, stupid things. We are his parents. We have a fundamental right to step in and manage his estate if he is acting erratically and selfishly." I finally broke my silence. I leaned forward, locking eyes with the woman who had spent my entire life putting me second. "I am 32 years old, Mom. I am a grown man. I am not a child, and I do not have an estate for you to manage. You tried to steal my money because Lucas threw a temper tantrum on the dining room floor, and you could not handle seeing your golden boy cry. He needed that money," she snapped back, her voice raising in pitch, completely ignoring the presence of the judge and the lawyers. "You have absolutely no idea the amount of pressure your brother is under. You have no idea what it takes to maintain his level of success." "We are very much aware of the pressure," Olivia interjected smoothly, her voice acting like a scalpel slicing right through my mother's rising hysterics. "Which brings us directly to Exhibit B." Olivia pulled a second, thinner document from her briefcase and slid it across the table. It was the dealership financing paperwork for the slate gray Porsche 911. When the bank's automated security algorithms locked my client's accounts and successfully prevented the illegal wire transfer, Evelyn took a different, far more desperate route. Olivia explained, looking directly into Davis's eyes. She used an old, shared family desktop computer to access my client's dormant secondary email account. She intercepted a DocuSign request from a luxury auto dealership. She then fraudulently forged my client's digital signature to act as the primary, legally binding guarantor on a $150,000 short-term bridge loan. The luxury vehicle in question is currently parked in the driveway and is in the sole possession of Lucas. Davis looked down at the paperwork in front of him. His slick, overconfident demeanor began to visibly fracture. He flipped rapidly through the pages, his eyes scanning the IP metadata, the digital timestamps, and the irrefutable digital trail that Olivia's private investigator had meticulously compiled. He looked up at my mother, his jaw tight with sudden realization. "Evelyn, you explicitly told me the car was purchased with a standard, mutually agreed upon family co-sign arrangement." "It was," my mother insisted, her voice pitching even higher, edging on panic. "Ethan always agreed to help his brother. He always said he would share his success. I just signed the digital paperwork to save everyone time. It is a family car. The dealership absolutely does not recognize it as a family car." Olivia countered instantly, leaving zero room for debate. "We have a sworn, notarized affidavit from Mr. Henderson, the general manager of the auto dealership. He confirmed under oath that the financing was approved solely based on my client's verified liquid assets, which Evelyn fraudulently misrepresented as her own. If we leave this room today without a full, unconditional settlement on our exact terms, I will personally hand this entire binder over to the district attorney's office. Wire fraud, identity theft, grand larceny. Your clients will be facing severe federal indictments before the end of the week." The room fell completely, utterly silent. The crushing reality of the legal situation finally breached the thick walls of their arrogance. My father buried his face in his hands, letting out a long, ragged, shuddering breath. My mother's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. She looked desperately at Davis, clearly expecting her expensive lawyer to perform some kind of legal miracle and make the evidence disappear. But Davis just closed the folder and pushed it slightly away from him. He knew a completely losing hand when he saw one. Lucas, however, was not finished. He slammed his fist down onto the mahogany table, his face twisted in desperate, cornered rage. "This is completely ridiculous," Lucas shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "You are bluffing. You would never send your own mother to federal prison. You are just trying to scare us because you are cheap and you are greedy. You have $25 million. Ethan, I am your flesh and blood. I have a high-level corporate salary to maintain, a pristine reputation to uphold in my industry. If you take that car away, my entire professional network will think I am failing. You owe me that Porsche. You owe me a cut of your software company. It is my inheritance too. You cannot do this to me." I looked at Lucas. I looked at the perfectly tailored suit, the expensive silver watch, the immaculate hair. He was a completely hollow shell of a man, propped up entirely by our parents' lifelong delusions and funded by my stolen money. He was so deeply, pathologically entrenched in his own lies that he actually, genuinely believed he was the victim of a great injustice. "You do not have a reputation to uphold, Lucas," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucas froze mid-rant. His eyes darted to my face, a sudden, blinding flash of panic appearing in his pupils. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice suddenly trembling. I looked over at Olivia. She gave me a single, sharp, confirming nod. The trap was perfectly set. The bait had been completely swallowed. It was time to drop the absolute bomb that would obliterate their golden family illusion forever. "Let us talk in detail about your high-level corporate salary, Lucas," Olivia said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, clinical register. She reached into the depths of her leather briefcase one final time and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Let us talk about this immense, crushing professional pressure your mother keeps referring to. The exact pressure that supposedly justifies defrauding my client out of millions of dollars. Olivia smoothly opened the envelope and extracted a thick stack of financial and human resources documents. She did not hand these to the opposing counsel. Instead, she spread them out face up across the center of the table, directly in front of Judge Harrison, making sure every single person in the room could see the official company letterheads. My private investigator did an incredibly thorough background check to determine the actual, underlying motive behind this sudden, desperate, and highly illegal need for $15 million. Olivia explained to the room, her tone completely matter-of-fact. Lucas has spent the better part of the last calendar year bragging to his entire extended family about a massive promotion at his corporate firm. He explicitly claimed he was on the accelerated partner track. He claimed his base salary had tripled, accompanied by massive performance bonuses. It did, Lucas shouted, his face turning an ugly, mottled shade of crimson. I am a senior director of regional sales. I run an entire division. Olivia ignored his outburst completely, not even blinking. According to the official employment records subpoenaed directly from the Human Resources Department of his former firm, Lucas was officially terminated for cause exactly 8 months ago. He has not drawn a single paycheck or salary since May. He does not have a promotion. He is not a senior director. He does not have a job of any kind. The silence in the conference room was absolute and profound. It was so quiet I could literally hear the winter wind howling against the thick glass windows 42 stories up in the sky. My father's head snapped up so fast I thought he might give himself whiplash. He stared at Lucas, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated horror. Terminated? What is she talking about, Lucas? You put on a suit and leave for the office every single morning at 7:30. I have seen you drive away. Lucas was trembling violently now. He looked exactly like a trapped animal backed into a corner with nowhere left to run. Dad, it's a complete lie. She is lying. Ethan paid someone to fabricate these documents to ruin my life and humiliate me in front of you. We do not fabricate legal documents, Olivia said sharply, her patience finally wearing thin. You were officially fired for gross negligence, repeated failure to meet basic sales quotas, and expensing highly inappropriate personal luxury vacations to your corporate credit card account. But the termination from the firm is only the very beginning of the story. Because a man without a corporate salary cannot possibly maintain a massive suburban mansion, a highly exclusive country club membership, and a wife who has grown deeply accustomed to a life of complete luxury. A man in that specific position needs a massive financial bailout. Olivia picked up a second, highly official-looking document from the table and turned her piercing gaze directly to my mother. Evelyn was clutching the edge of the mahogany table so incredibly hard her knuckles were completely white. The blood drained from her hands. When Lucas was fired and realized he was utterly bankrupt, he went directly to his mother. Olivia continued, the pieces of the complex puzzle snapping together with brutal, unforgiving precision. And Evelyn, absolutely determined to protect the golden child's perfect image at all costs, decided to secretly fund his lavish lifestyle to keep up appearances. But Arthur and Evelyn, living on a fixed retirement income, did not have the liquid cash required to support a defunct, unemployed corporate executive. Their life savings had already been completely drained years ago, paying off Lucas's previous credit card debts and funding his out-of-state college education. Olivia slid the heavy document across the smooth wood, stopping it directly in front of my father. Arthur, I strongly suggest you put on your glasses and read this document very carefully, Olivia said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic but firm tone. It is a legally binding record of a second mortgage deed of trust. Exactly 3 months ago, your wife fraudulently forged your signature to take out a massive equity line of credit against your primary real estate property. She mortgaged the family home to the absolute maximum limit. She has been systematically funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars from that equity line directly into Lucas's personal checking account to make it look like he is still drawing his senior director salary. Your entire family is not just struggling. You are entirely, irreversibly bankrupt. My father let out a sound that will be permanently etched into my memory for the rest of my life. It was a hollow, breathless, agonizing gasp, sounding exactly like a man who had just been brutally stabbed in the chest. He picked up the mortgage document with violently shaking hands. He read the staggering numbers printed on the page. He read the clumsy, forged signature of his own name at the bottom of the contract. "Evelyn?" my father whispered, his voice cracking and breaking on the syllables. He slowly turned his head and looked at his wife of over 40 years as if she were a total, terrifying stranger. "You remortgaged the house? You put the home we have lived in for 30 years in jeopardy for this? You forged my name." Evelyn finally broke. She burst into loud, hysterical tears. But they were not tears of genuine remorse or guilt for betraying her husband. They were the desperate, angry tears of a severe narcissist who had finally been dragged out into the harsh, unforgiving light. "I had absolutely no choice. I had to do it," she wailed loudly, reaching out a trembling hand to grab my father's arm. He recoiled violently, pulling his chair away from her as if she were carrying a contagious disease. Lucas was going to lose everything he worked for. Sarah was going to divorce him and take the house. I could not stand by and let my son be a public failure. It was only supposed to be temporary. I was going to fix it before you ever found out. "How?" my father roared, abruptly standing up from his chair. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I had never, in 32 years, seen my father yell. Never. He was a passive, quiet, conflict-avoidant man who always let my mother run the show. But the sudden, crushing realization that his peaceful retirement, his only home, and his entire financial security had been secretly and illegally gambled away completely broke something inside of him. "How in the name of God were you going to fix a $500,000 mortgage behind my back, Evelyn?" Evelyn slowly turned her tear-streaked, makeup-smeared face toward me. The absolute, unhinged madness burning in her eyes made my blood run entirely cold. "Ethan was going to fix it," she whispered, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my chest. "He sold his tech company. He has $25 million sitting in the bank doing nothing. He has more money than he could ever possibly need in a single lifetime. He was supposed to step up and pay off the second mortgage. He was supposed to give Lucas the $15 million so Lucas could start his own consulting firm and save face. Ethan was the permanent solution to all of our problems. He owed us for giving him a life." The absolute, terrifying sickness of her twisted logic hung heavily in the freezing air of the conference room. She had single-handedly destroyed her own comfortable life, utterly ruined my father's retirement and future, and continually enabled my brother's total, catastrophic failure, all under the psychotic, deeply entrenched assumption that my hard-earned bank account was her own personal, unlimited insurance policy. Lucas was completely and utterly broken. The grand, arrogant facade of the highly successful, wealthy, untouchable older brother had been violently ripped away, exposing the pathetic, desperate, lying fraud underneath. He slumped forward in his expensive chair, covering his face with both of his hands, weeping openly and loudly. The golden boy was completely gone. There was only a middle-aged man drowning in an ocean of insurmountable debt and a lifetime of toxic lies. I looked at the three people sitting across from me. I looked at the people who were supposed to be my family, my blood, my support system. I looked at the absolute devastation they had brought upon themselves through pure, unadulterated greed, blinding favoritism, and criminal entitlement. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I felt entirely, wonderfully, peacefully empty. Olivia efficiently packed the employment records and the mortgage documents back into her leather briefcase. She looked directly at Davis, who was staring at his own clients with a distinct mixture of severe professional disgust and sheer, unadulterated shock. Davis had clearly been lied to by his own clients. "Here are our final, non-negotiable terms," Olivia announced, her voice ringing through the room with absolute, terrifying finality. "Number 1. Ethan will not pay a single solitary cent to anyone in this room, now or ever. Number 2. Evelyn and Lucas will immediately surrender the slate gray Porsche 911 back to Mr. Henderson at the auto dealership today, and they will be held entirely and personally responsible for any depreciation fees or penalties. Number 3. Evelyn, Arthur, and Lucas will immediately sign an ironclad, legally binding no-contact order and a strict non-disclosure agreement regarding Ethan's finances and this entire mediation. If they ever attempt to contact him, if they attempt to access his accounts again, or if they speak a single word about his wealth or this legal proceeding to any extended family members, we will immediately bypass civil court and file criminal charges for the wire fraud and the forged loan documents. You have exactly 5 minutes to sign the settlement papers, or we walk out that door and call the police. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The absolute silence that followed Olivia's uncompromising ultimatum was heavy, suffocating, and entirely, deeply satisfying. The fundamental power dynamic in the room had irreparably shifted, like a massive tectonic plate snapping into a new position. For 32 long, agonizing years, my parents had entirely dictated the terms of my existence. They had unilaterally decided my worth, my place in the hierarchy, and my future. They had relegated me to the shadows while bathing Lucas in endless, unearned sunlight. Now, sitting across that polished mahogany table, holding the absolute proof of their criminal desperation, I held their entire lives and freedom in the palm of my hand. Davis, the opposing lawyer, didn't even attempt to negotiate or offer a counterproposal. He was a professional, and he knew his clients were completely dead in the water. He pulled an expensive gold pen from the inner pocket of his suit jacket and placed it gently on the table next to the thick stack of settlement documents Olivia had just laid out. He looked over at my father, who was still staring blankly at the wall. "Arthur," Davis said quietly, dropping the aggressive, sleazy lawyer persona entirely. His tone was now strictly advisory, tinged with genuine pity. "You need to sign this document immediately. If Ethan takes this binder of evidence to the authorities, Evelyn is looking at a mandatory minimum of 3 to 5 years in a federal prison facility for the wire fraud alone. And Lucas will absolutely go down alongside her as an accessory to the crime and the recipient of stolen goods. This settlement offer is a massive, incredibly generous gift. Take it before they change their minds." My father didn't put up a fight. He didn't argue. The last remaining ounce of fight had completely drained out of his body the moment he saw the forged signature on the second mortgage. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the span of 30 minutes. He slowly reached out and picked up the gold pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely grip the smooth barrel. He pressed the tip to the paper and signed his name on the dotted line, legally severing his right to ever ask me for a dime, a favor, or a relationship again. He slid the legal packet and the pen across the table toward my mother. Evelyn stared at the document like it was a highly venomous snake coiled on the wood. She looked up at me, the expensive mascara running in dark, ugly streaks down her cheeks. Her face was twisted into a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated hatred and stubborn denial. She had lost the war. The golden child had been completely exposed as a pathetic fraud. Her personal finances were in absolute, unrecoverable ruins, and the son she had discarded and mocked for 3 decades was walking away totally untouchable and victorious. "You are destroying this family?" she hissed at me, the toxic venom dripping from every single syllable. "You are deliberately sending your own flesh and blood into total bankruptcy and ruin. You will burn in hell for turning your back on us. Ethan, you are a monster." I looked right into her eyes. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. "I didn't destroy this family, Mom," I said, my voice incredibly steady, projecting a coldness that I didn't even know I possessed. You destroyed it the moment you decided my sole purpose in life was to serve as a backup plan for Lucas. You bankrupted yourself. You forged the signatures. You committed the crimes. I am just the man holding up the mirror so you can finally see exactly what you are. Sign the paper or I promise you, I will call the police right now. Evelyn's jaw clenched so tightly I honestly thought her teeth might shatter under the pressure. She snatched the pen from the table with a violent, jerky motion and aggressively scrawled her name across the document, pressing so hard the pen almost tore through the paper. When she was done, she threw the pen across the table. It hit Lucas right in the chest. Lucas didn't say a single word. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at his mother. He kept his eyes locked firmly on the grain of the mahogany table, tears silently dripping off his chin and staining the expensive fabric of his custom suit. He slowly picked up the pen and signed his name, officially surrendering his fictional inheritance, surrendering the luxury Porsche, and surrendering the lifelong illusion of his absolute superiority. Olivia meticulously checked every single signature on the documents, ensuring everything was perfectly, legally binding. She placed the signed contracts into her briefcase, snapped the brass locks shut, and stood up from her chair. "We are officially done here," Olivia said, addressing the mediator. I stood up, buttoned my navy blazer, and walked toward the heavy glass doors. I didn't look back at them. I didn't say a dramatic goodbye. The exact moment I stepped out of that freezing mediation room and into the quiet, carpeted hallway of the law firm, I felt an immense, physical weight lift entirely off my shoulders. It was a crushing, invisible weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying for my entire life. The desperate, pathetic need for their approval, the lingering, childish hope that they might one day actually love me for who I was, it was all completely gone, evaporated into thin air. And in its place was a profound, unshakable, beautiful sense of absolute freedom. The real-world fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. The very next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, a heavy-duty tow truck arrived at my parents' quiet suburban home. The neighbors, the very people my mother had spent decades trying to impress with her manicured lawns and fake stories of success, all peeked through their living room blinds. They watched in shocked silence as the brand-new, slate-gray Porsche 911 was unceremoniously hooked up, dragged out of the driveway, and loaded onto a flatbed truck for repossession. Lucas stood on the front lawn in his bathrobe, watching his ultimate status symbol disappear down the street, while Sarah stood in the doorway screaming at him at the top of her lungs. But I didn't just stop at the legal settlement and the repossession. I needed to ensure that the vicious smear campaign my mother had started among our relatives was permanently dismantled. I reached out to Thomas, an independent, highly respected journalist who specialized in business and tech profiles. Thomas had been emailing me for months, wanting to do a deep dive piece on the quiet, highly successful acquisition of my real estate logistics software company. I finally agreed to sit down for an exclusive interview. I didn't use the article to explicitly bash my family or air our dirty laundry. That would have been petty, and it would have made me look bitter. Instead, I simply used the platform to tell the undeniable truth about my background. I talked extensively about my difficult journey. I talked about working brutal night shifts at the greasy diner. I talked about taking out terrible loans to fund my own community college education because there was absolutely no college fund left for me. I talked about the intense, agonizing isolation of building a tech company completely alone in a freezing apartment, without a safety net, without a single dollar of family backing, and without any expectation of an inheritance. When the comprehensive article finally dropped online, it went massively viral within the business and tech community. It was praised as an incredibly inspiring story of modern grit, determination, and ultimate self-reliance. But to my extended family, the article was a massive, undeniable public revelation. Aunt Clara immediately shared the article on her social media pages. From there, the truth about Lucas's corporate termination, the truth about his massive debts, and the truth about my parents' desperate second mortgage inevitably leaked through the family grapevine. The carefully constructed, decades-old facade of the perfect, wealthy family completely and utterly collapsed overnight. Evelyn stopped answering her phone entirely, too ashamed to face the questions from her sisters. Lucas and Sarah were forced to put their massive suburban house on the market within a week to avoid total foreclosure. The golden child had finally flown too close to the sun, and his wax wings had melted entirely, sending him crashing down into the harsh reality he had avoided his entire life. It has been exactly 1 full year since I walked out of that freezing mediation room and left my family sitting at that mahogany table. I haven't spoken a single word to my parents or my brother since that day. The strict, legally binding no-contact order remains firmly in place, acting as an invisible, impenetrable shield around my life. Occasionally, I hear brief updates through Aunt Clara, who is the only relative I still maintain a warm relationship with. She told me over coffee last month that Lucas and Sarah finalized their bitter divorce in the fall. Sarah took full custody of their golden retriever and moved back into her parents' basement, completely unable to handle the harsh reality of being married to a broke, unemployed man who didn't have a platinum corporate credit card to fund her lifestyle. Lucas is currently renting a cramped, incredibly small 1-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. He is working a stressful, mid-level telemarketing sales job, desperately trying to slowly dig himself out of the massive mountain of debt that my parents can no longer legally or financially shield him from. As for my parents, they were forced to sell the large, beautiful suburban house they had lived in for 30 years. They absolutely had to. The massive second mortgage my mother secretly took out was bleeding their fixed retirement accounts dry. They had to drastically downsize to a small 2-bedroom condo in a completely different, much cheaper county, far away from the judging, gossiping eyes of their old neighborhood friends and country club acquaintances. Their reputation in their old circle is completely destroyed. I don't take any sadistic joy in their misery. I really, truly don't. But at the same time, I also don't lose a single second of sleep over their current situation. They made their calculated, selfish choices over the course of 3 decades, and they are finally, for the first time in their lives, facing the severe consequences of those choices without me acting as their designated human shield and financial punching bag. As for me, my life looks completely, wonderfully different now. When the $25 million hit my bank account, I didn't go out and buy a massive fleet of luxury sports cars to park in a driveway. I didn't buy a gigantic, echoing mansion in the city just to show off to people I didn't care about. Instead, I bought a beautiful, quiet, sprawling piece of heavily wooded land up in the mountains, about 2 hours outside of the city. I hired an architect and built a custom house with massive, floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the warm morning light. It is a place where the air is incredibly clean, and the only sounds you can hear are the wind moving through the tall pine trees and the occasional deer walking through the yard. It is my absolute sanctuary, a highly secure place where absolutely nobody is ever allowed to demand anything from me. But more importantly than the house, I found a brand new, deeply fulfilling purpose in my life. Having millions of dollars in the bank gave me incredible freedom, but money alone didn't give me internal fulfillment. I realized over the past year that my difficult experiences, the agonizing years I spent scraping by at the diner, and fighting for every single inch of ground in the corporate world, were incredibly valuable lessons. I took a portion of my wealth and started a dedicated mentorship foundation for young, highly driven, underprivileged entrepreneurs. I work specifically with teenagers and young adults who come from broken homes, kids who do not have a shiny college fund waiting for them, kids who have been explicitly told their entire lives by their parents or teachers that they aren't smart enough, fast enough, or good enough to succeed. I personally fund their initial startup ideas. I sit in conference rooms with them for hours and teach them how to write code, how to pitch to angel investors, how to deeply understand real estate logistics, and how to navigate complex corporate strategy. When I look at those kids sitting across the table from me, their eyes wide with ambition, I see myself. I see the raw hunger, the quiet desperation, and the immense, beautiful, completely untapped potential that just needs a little bit of watering to grow. I give them the one specific, crucial thing my family intentionally withheld from me my entire life: absolute, unconditional support and belief in their abilities. Through this foundation and my new ventures, I have built an entirely new network of people around me. I have found brilliant colleagues who genuinely respect my mind and my work ethic. I have found amazing friends who highly value my time, my conversation, and my loyalty, not the balance of my bank account. I have learned the hardest, most vital lesson of my life. Blood does not automatically make someone your family. Sharing DNA just makes you biologically related. Family are the people who willingly stand by your side when the chips are down and the world is dark. Family are the people who loudly celebrate your ultimate victories without ever holding out their hand and asking for a cut of the prize. Sometimes, late at night, when the mountain house is completely quiet, I still think about that chaotic Christmas dinner. I think about the horrifying look of sheer entitlement on my mother's face when she screamed at the top of her lungs, accusing me of stealing my older brother's future. It used to hurt so badly. The memory of that rejection used to feel like a jagged knife twisting deep in my ribs. But now it just feels like a dramatic scene from a movie I watched a very, very long time ago. It doesn't have any power over me anymore. I survived the suffocating, toxic shadow of the golden child. I built a massive, untouchable empire entirely in the dark, and when they arrogantly tried to drag me back down into their mess to pay for their lifelong sins, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and threw away the key forever. They desperately wanted my future, but they never realized that I had already built it, brick by painful brick, with my own two bare hands. And nobody, absolutely nobody on this earth, is ever taking it away from me. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If there is one crucial, life-changing thing I want you to take away from hearing about my journey, it is this: your inherent value as a human being is not determined by how financially or emotionally useful you are to toxic, manipulative people, even if those people happen to be the parents who raised you. You have the absolute, undeniable right to set firm boundaries, to fiercely protect your mental peace, and to walk away permanently from anyone who only knows how to love you conditionally. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family dynamics? Have you ever had to make the agonizing decision to cut ties to protect yourself and your future? Share your personal story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. We are in this together.